The geopolitical landscape of North American defense is undergoing a profound transformation. For decades, the partnership between Canada and the United States operated through deeply integrated systems, shared infrastructure like NORAD, and long-standing agreements that were considered unshakable. But as global tensions rise and national policies shift, we are witnessing a fundamental re-evaluation of what military sovereignty means in the 21st century. At the heart of this tension is a high-stakes aerospace decision. Canada is currently reviewing its multi-billion-dollar commitment to purchase 88 F-35 fighter jets from American manufacturer Lockheed Martin. This isn't simply a procurement decision about which plane can fly faster or higher. It represents a critical juncture for Canadian industrial policy, national sovereignty, and the future of its relationship with its most powerful ally. The pressure from Washington has been extraordinary. The United States ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, issued a stark warning, suggesting that if Canada did not proceed with the F-35 purchase, American jets would fly more frequently and more deeply into Canadian airspace. This kind of rhetoric would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump escalated the tension by threatening 50% tariffs on Canadian-made aircraft unless Canada certified specific American Gulfstream jets, a dispute that directly linked trade policy with aerospace certification. These actions have triggered a political response in Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney is now facing calls from the New Democratic Party to cancel the F-35 contract entirely. The argument, as articulated by interim NDP leader Don Davies, is straightforward. Purchasing American jets deepens military integration with a superpower rather than reducing dependence. He has specifically proposed that Canada should instead acquire Swedish Gripen fighters, suggesting this would represent the middle powers building a new world order together. To understand why this debate matters so profoundly, we need to examine how modern military systems are actually built and controlled. The F-35 is not merely an aircraft. It is a flying computer, a sensor fusion platform that generates more data per mission than any previous fighter in history. But the data and the processed are subject to American ETAR restrictions, international traffic in arms regulations. These rules mean that the United States government maintains significant control over how the aircraft can be used, maintained, and even what software updates it can receive. For any nation concerned about true operational sovereignty, this creates a fundamental vulnerability. If political tensions ever escalated to the point where Washington withheld software updates or restricted access to critical spare parts, an F-35 fleet could theoretically be grounded not by enemy action, but by diplomatic dispute. This is the nightmare scenario that defense planners must now consider. The Swedish alternative offers a dramatically different model. Saab, the manufacturer of the JAS-39 Gripen, has made an extraordinary proposal to Ottawa. They are offering not just to sell aircraft, but to transfer production to Canada. The first batch of Gripens would be manufactured in Sweden, but final assembly would then transition to Canadian facilities. Even more significantly, Saab has committed to transferring intellectual property, the actual design knowledge, and manufacturing rights to Canada. This is unprecedented in modern fighter aircraft transfers. Saab estimates this arrangement would create approximately 6,000 direct jobs across Canada, sustained over for decades, with a guarantee of 100% offsets, meaning every dollar spent on the aircraft would generate economic value within Canada. Other estimates suggest the broader economic impact could reach 12,600 jobs when considering the full supply chain. The Gripen itself is uniquely suited to Canada's geographic reality. It was designed to operate in the Nordic region, meaning it can handle extreme cold and austere conditions. The aircraft is famous for its ability to operate from remote airfields, even highways if necessary, with minimal support infrastructure. A team of just 6 maintenance personnel can refuel and rearm a Gripen in approximately 10 minutes. This expeditionary capability matters enormously for a country tasked with patrolling the second-largest airspace on Earth, much of it Arctic and undeveloped. However, we must be clear about the capability differences between these aircraft. The F-35 is a 5th-generation stealth fighter. The Gripen, while highly capable, is generally classified as a 4th-generation plus aircraft. The F-35 carries its weapons internally to maintain stealth. The Gripen uses external hardpoints. The F-35 sensor fusion allows it to see and share targeting data in ways that older aircraft cannot match. This is why some defense analysts suggest Canada might pursue both aircraft simultaneously. Saab's own marketing chief has acknowledged that the F-35 and Gripen could complement each other. noting that the F-35 has stealth advantages while the Gripen offers lower operating costs and higher availability rates. A mixed fleet could theoretically provide Canada with high-end stealth capability for penetrating contested airspace, while Gripens handle the vast majority of homeland, defense and Arctic patrol missions at a fraction of the operating cost. The cost differential is significant. When Canada first agreed to purchase the F-35 in 2022, the program was estimated at $19 billion Canadian. By 2025, audits revealed that costs had ballooned to $27.7 billion. Meanwhile, the Gripen was designed from the outset for low operating costs and simplified maintenance. For a country facing significant fiscal pressures, this matters enormously. Prime Minister Carney has confirmed that Canada is now making what he calls long lead payments for 14 additional F-35s, bringing total committed aircraft to 30. He explicitly framed these payments as maintaining options, paying a relatively small amount to keep production slots available while the broader strategic review continues. This suggests Ottawa is not yet ready to walk away from the American aircraft entirely. This hedging strategy reflects the complexity of Canada's position. Through NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, Canadian and American forces operate as a single integrated network for continental defense. Just weeks ago, in February 2026, NORAD completed Operation Noble Defender, a major Arctic exercise based out of Pitchfork Space Base in Greenland. American F-16s and Canadian CF-18s operated together in temperatures reaching -36 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill, demonstrating the seamless interoperability that has defined this partnership for decades. That interoperability was hard-won. It requires common communication systems, shared data links, and integrated command structures. Introducing a non-American aircraft complicates that integration. It means maintaining separate logistics pipelines, separate training programs, and potentially separate operational doctrines. Some defense officials warn this could reduce overall combat effectiveness and limit Canada's ability to participate fully in modern coalition operations. Yet Canada's new defense industrial strategy, announced in February 2026, signals a clear intention to reduce American dependence. The strategy, titled Build, Partner, Buy, sets an ambitious goal of awarding 70% of federal defense contracts to Canadian firms within a decade. Currently, approximately 75 cents of every dollar Canada spends on military capital equipment goes to the United States, a level of dependence that Prime Minister Carney has explicitly described as unsustainable. The strategy document states bluntly that Canada cannot afford to outsource its national defense. It identifies 10 industrial sectors where Canada requires sovereign capability, with aerospace at the top of the list. The government intends to enter formal strategic partnerships with select Canadian companies, ensuring domestic ownership and control over critical intellectual property. This is a fundamental shift from decades of procurement policy that prioritized interoperability with the United States above all else. This Canadian strategy was released just days after former President Trump signed an executive order establishing an America First arms transfer strategy, which aims to further build American manufacturing capacity and make the United States the world's primary arms supplier. Both nations are moving in the same direction toward protection of domestic industrial bases, but in direct competition with each other. The broader strategic context matters here. The Pentagon's 2026 National Defense Strategy, released in January, places renewed emphasis on the Western Hemisphere and homeland defense. It explicitly calls on allies and partners to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. The NATO target, but also signals that Washington expects allies to do more for their own defense with limited American support. The strategy mentions securing key terrain including Greenland and the Panama Canal, while acknowledging that relationships with traditional allies like Canada have deteriorated. For Canada, this creates an uncomfortable paradox. The United States is simultaneously demanding that allies spend more on defense while pursuing trade policies that damage Canadian industry and diplomatic rhetoric that questions the foundation of the partnership. When American officials threaten to send fighter jets deeper into Canadian airspace if Canada doesn't buy American planes, it inevitably raises questions about whether the traditional alliance structure can survive intact. The industrial implications extend far beyond the aircraft themselves. Modern fighter procurement involves decades of maintenance, upgrades, and supply chain relationships. Choosing the F-35 means Canadian industry becomes a minor partner in a vast American-led global supply chain. Choosing the Gripen could mean Canada becomes a manufacturing hub for a European platform with significant export potential. Saab has explicitly stated that a Canadian production line would manufacture not only for the Royal Canadian Air Force but for export customers as well. This would transform Canada from a defense consumer into a defense producer, with all the economic and technological spillovers that implies. Saab's offer includes intellectual property transfer that would allow Canada to enhance its domestic aerospace capabilities for generations. Wendy Gilmour, a Canadian who served as Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment at NATO, has cautioned that Canada's new strategy risks repeating old mistakes. She notes that historically, Canada has used defense procurement primarily as economic development conduit rather than focusing on military capability. The danger, she suggests, is that industrial policy goals could dilute the focus on what the military actually needs to fight and win. This tension between sovereignty and capability is real. The F-35 represents the most advanced fighter technology in existence. Its sensors, networking capabilities, and stealth characteristics are unmatched. If Canada faces a future threat that requires penetrating advanced air defenses, the Gripen would be at a significant disadvantage. The question is whether Canada's most likely threats justify that level of capability, and whether the sovereignty cost of depending on American technology is acceptable. The timeline for decision-making is compressing. Canada has already committed to 16 F-35s, with long lead payments now made for 14 more. The first aircraft are scheduled to arrive in 2026. But the option to pivot remains open for the remaining aircraft beyond the 30 now effectively committed. That decision will likely come within the next year. Let me outline 3 possible scenarios that could reshape North American security as a result of these dynamics. The first scenario is continuation. Canada proceeds with the full F-35 purchase, accepting continued integration with American systems as the price of maintaining the NORAD alliance. The industrial benefits are limited, but interoperability remains seamless. This path assumes that the current trade and diplomatic tensions are temporary, and that the traditional partnership will eventually stabilize. The second scenario is the mixed fleet. Canada maintains a core of approximately 30 F-35s for high-end missions where stealth is essential, while acquiring Gripens for the majority of its homeland defense needs. This provides data sovereignty through the Swedish aircraft while preserving some of the capability advantages of the American fleet. It also delivers significant industrial benefits through the Gripen production line. However, it introduces all the complexity and cost of operating to different fighter types with separate training, logistics, and infrastructure requirements. The third scenario is the full pivot. Canada cancels the remaining F-35 commitment beyond the 16 already contracted, committing fully to the Gripen as its primary fighter. This maximizes industrial benefits and data sovereignty, potentially positioning Canada as a significant aerospace manufacturing hub. It sends the strongest possible signal about Canadian independence from American defense policy. But it also risks degrading interoperability with NORAD partners and potentially creates a capability gap if fourth-generation aircraft prove insufficient for future threats. There is also a fourth possibility, suggested by some analysts, that the F-35 and Gripen could be acquired sequentially, with Gripens filling the majority of requirements while a smaller number of F-5 Sekunde provide niche high-end capability. This would spread the costs over a longer period while maintaining options. What makes this moment unique is the explicit linkage between defense procurement and broader geopolitical strategy. Prime Minister Carney has spoken repeatedly about the need for middle powers to build new alliances and reduce dependence on any single partner. His government has signed defense cooperation agreements with Denmark and the European Union. And Canada recently joined the European Defense Fund, moves that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago when continental integration with the United States was the unquestioned priority. The American response to Canadian independence will be critical to watch. If Washington views a Canadian pivot to European fighters as a betrayal, it could take retaliatory actions that damage not only defense cooperation but the broader economic relationship. Alternatively, a mature alliance might accommodate different procurement choices while maintaining the core security partnership. We should also consider the Arctic dimension. As climate change opens new shipping routes and increases access to resources, the Arctic is becoming a region of strategic competition. Both Russia and China are increasing their presence and capabilities in the high north. Canada's ability to patrol and control its Arctic territory depends on having aircraft that can operate in extreme conditions from limited infrastructure. This is an area where the Gripen's austere field capabilities are genuinely advantageous. The recent NORAD exercise in Greenland demonstrated that operating in the Arctic remains challenging even for the most advanced air forces. Temperatures that defeat ordinary equipment, distances that strain logistics, and limited infrastructure all combine to make Arctic air power uniquely demanding. Any aircraft Canada chooses must prove it can handle these conditions year after year. Another factor often overlooked is the human dimension. Fighter pilots train for years to master their aircraft. Switching platforms requires extensive retraining and creates a period of reduced capability. Maintenance crews must learn entirely new systems. The Canadian Defence Industrial Base has spent decades supporting American-designed aircraft. A pivot to Swedish design would require significant investment in new skills, new tooling, and new relationships with suppliers. Yet this investment might be precisely what Canada's aerospace sector needs to remain competitive. The Canadian industry has world-class capabilities in simulation, training, and components, but it lacks prime contractor experience, the ability to lead major platform development. Partnering with Saab on Gripen production and eventual exports could build that capability over time, positioning Canadian firms for future opportunities. The numbers involved are substantial. Saab projects that Gripen-related work would sustain 6,000 direct jobs over 40 years. The broader Canadian defence industrial strategy aims to create 125,000 additional jobs across the country by 2035 through increased defence production and exports. These are not trivial figures in an economy seeking new sources of growth. There is also the question of what other allies are doing. Several European nations operate mixed fleets, combining high-end American aircraft with European platforms for specific roles. The logistical complexity is manageable for nations with sufficient resources and commitment. The question is whether Canada has the political will and budgetary capacity to manage that complexity effectively. The F-35 program has faced significant criticism regarding readiness rates. Maintaining mission-capable F-35s has proven more challenging and expensive than anticipated for many operators. The Gripen, by contrast, has a reputation for high availability and lower maintenance demands. In an era of constrained defense budgets, platforms that spend more time flying and less time in maintenance have obvious appeal. Prime Minister Carney's personal background adds another dimension to this story. As a former central banker who navigated global financial crises, he understands the importance of diversified risk. His call for middle powers to build new alliances reflects a worldview shaped by experience in international institutions. He is less likely than some predecessors to accept American dominance as inevitable or desirable. The timing of these decisions matters. The 2026 Defense Industrial Strategy sets 10-year targets, but the fighter decision will be made much sooner. Once Canada commits beyond the 30 aircraft currently in process, the opportunity to pivot diminishes significantly. The next 12 months will likely determine the shape of Canadian air power for the next half-century. We must also consider the message sent to other allies. If Canada, America's closest neighbor and most integrated partner, chooses to diversify its defense procurement away from the United States, what signal does that send to NATO allies in Europe or partners in Asia? Other nations watching this debate may draw their own conclusions about the reliability of American security guarantees and the wisdom of depending on American equipment. This is why Washington's response has been so forceful. Allowing Canada to pivot to a European fighter would set a precedent that could unravel decades of American defense export dominance. The F-35 was designed partly to lock allies into long-term dependency on American sustainment and upgrades. If that lock is broken, the business model for future American weapons systems may need fundamental revision. Yet American pressure tactics may be counterproductive, threatening to send fighters into Canadian airspace if Canada doesn't buy. American planes is precisely the kind of rhetoric that convinces Canadians they need independent capabilities. The former president's trade threats and dismissive comments about Canadian sovereignty have unified Canadian political opinion across party lines in favor of reducing dependence. The paradox is that American bullying may achieve the opposite of its intended effect. By demonstrating that American goodwill cannot be taken for granted, Washington has accelerated Canadian efforts to build independent capabilities. This dynamic will likely repeat with other allies as American foreign policy becomes more transactional and less based on shared values. For viewers interested in defense economics, this case study illustrates how modern military procurement is about far more than hardware. It's about software control, data rights, supply chain security, industrial policy, and long-term strategic positioning. The aircraft themselves are almost incidental to these larger questions of sovereignty and independence. The Gripen offer to transfer intellectual property is particularly significant. Most arms sales involve strict limits on what the purchaser can do with the technology. By offering Canada ownership of the design and manufacturing rights, Saab is making a strategic bet that sovereignty matters more to middle powers than marginal performance advantages. If this bet pays off, it could reshape the global defense market. For American defense firms, this represents a wake-up call. For decades, they could assume that allies would buy American, because there was no alternative with comparable capability and because the alliance relationship guaranteed access. If allies now prioritize sovereignty over capability, and if European competitors offer genuine technology transfer, the American defense export model may need fundamental reinvention. The Canadian debate also illuminates the growing importance of what strategists call the defense technological and industrial base. Nations are recognizing that in a crisis, they cannot rely on foreign suppliers to deliver spare parts, ammunition, and upgrades. Domestic production capacity is a form of strategic resilience that cannot be outsourced. This explains why Canada's new strategy emphasizes building sovereign capabilities in ammunition production, sensors, space-based surveillance, and drones alongside aerospace. The goal is not just to buy different equipment, but to build the capacity to sustain military operations independently if necessary. The cost of building that capacity is substantial. The Canadian strategy commits $6.6 billion to industrial transformation, part of a broader $81.8 billion defense reinvestment plan. These are real resources that could have been spent on additional F-35s or other military capabilities. The choice to invest in industrial capacity rather than additional platforms reflects a strategic judgment that sovereignty matters more than mass. For the Royal Canadian Air Force, this creates uncertainty. Pilots need to train on the aircraft they will fly in combat. Maintenance crews need to learn specific systems. Base infrastructure needs to be configured for specific platforms. Every month that the decision remains uncertain delays the eventual transition and extends the life of aging CF-18s that are increasingly difficult to sustain. The CF-18 fleet, Canada's current fighter, has been in service since the 1980s. Maintaining these aircraft grows more expensive and challenging each year. The need for a replacement is genuine and urgent, regardless of which platform is ultimately chosen. This urgency may ultimately drive the decision. Canada cannot afford to wait indefinitely while political debates continue. At some point, the operational necessity of getting new aircraft into service will outweigh sovereignty concerns. The question is whether that point arrives before or after a decision to pivot to the Gripen. The aerospace industry itself is watching closely. Lockheed Martin has invested heavily in its Canadian supply chain, betting that the F-35 decision would ultimately hold. Saab has established a Canadian presence and begun building relationships with potential local partners. Both companies understand that this contract will shape their Canadian operations for decades. There is also the question of what other capabilities might be bundled with the fighter decision. Saab has proposed not just Gripens but also GlobalEye early warning aircraft, which would provide airborne command and control capabilities Canada currently lacks. This integrated air defense package could be more valuable than fighters alone. The American offer is more narrowly focused on the F-35 itself, with the assumption that other capabilities will be provided through NOR-AD integration. This reflects fundamentally different philosophies of defense: American integration versus European partnership. As we consider the future of North American defense, it's worth remembering that alliances exist to serve national interests, not the reverse. When an alliance stops serving the interests of its members, it weakens and eventually dissolves. The NOR-AD partnership has served both nations well for 7 decades, but it requires mutual respect and shared interests to survive. The current tensions will test whether that partnership can adapt to new circumstances. Canada is likely to remain committed to North American defense regardless of which fighter it chooses. But the terms of that commitment may shift, with Ottawa seeking a more equal relationship rather than dependent integration. For viewers interested in the broader implications, This Canadian debate is a case study in how middle powers are navigating a world of great power competition. As the United States and China compete for global influence, and as Russia asserts itself regionally, nations like Canada must decide how much autonomy they can afford and how much dependence they can accept. The fighter decision will not answer all these questions, but it will signal Canada's direction. Choosing the F-35 signals continued integration with the American orbit. Choosing the Gripen signals a more independent posture and deeper engagement with European partners. Choosing both signals a hedging strategy that preserves options at the cost of complexity. Each path has risks and opportunities. The F-35 offers proven capability and seamless integration, but at the cost of continued dependence. The Gripen offers sovereignty and industrial benefits, but with integration challenges and potential capability gaps. The mixed fleet offers compromise, but with added cost and complexity. Prime Minister Carney has suggested that Canada can have both strategic autonomy and strong alliances. This strategic autonomy does not mean isolation, he said recently. It means being strong enough to be a partner of choice rather than a dependent. This framing suggests Ottawa sees independence and alliance membership as complementary rather than contradictory. Whether this vision proves realistic depends on how Washington responds. If American leaders accept Canadian autonomy as legitimate and work to maintain partnership despite different procurement choices, the alliance can survive and perhaps even strengthen. If American leaders treat any divergence as betrayal and respond with retaliation, the alliance will fray. The next year will tell us which path we are on. For now, the only certainty is uncertainty. The old certainties of North American defense integration have given way to a new era of renegotiation and reassessment. How this story ends will shape not just Canadian and American security, but the broader architecture of Western alliance relationships for decades to come. Thank you for watching this analysis of the Canada fighter decision and its implications for North American defense. We'll continue to monitor these developments as they unfold and bring you updates as new information becomes available.